All right, it's recording now, Chinchi.
Oh, we don't need to record now. I'm just saying that we will record maybe. Welcome everybody. My name is Qianqi Huang. I'm the Executive Director of Asian Women for Health. And I'd like to have Hanako to say something about the song that we just hear. And thank you for providing the music for us to keep the meeting today.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Actually, the composer of this song is participating via Zoom as well. Utako, I don't know if you can hear me. So if you want to introduce about this song yourself. Maybe she's not hearing.
Hello.
Oh, yes, great.
All right. Hello, everyone. I wasn't sure. I was just finished sound check, but anyway. So I'm a founder of Skybridge, and we are initiative of group of musicians from all over the world, and we create music from audience and people and musicians, and to promote diversity and equality and world peace. Thank you for playing music.
Thank you. So before we officially start the meeting today, we would like to have a moment of silence to honor those who lost their life to racism and also to police brutality. And before we do that, I just wanted to let people know that we are recording this event and we're live streaming on Facebook. So if you don't want to be do a photo or picture on the video, please, you can turn off your camera. So let's have a moment of silence. Thank you, everybody. So again, my name is Qianqi Huang. I'm the Executive Director for Asian Women for Health. And today we're really honored and pleased to have 5 different Asian women's group, their leaders, to join us today. And it's a really timely event because we have just recently produced a public service announcement in reacting to the recent incidents. We know that after COVID-19, we've seen many anti-Asian sentiment and incidents on the rise. And this PSA actually was produced before the murder of George Floyd. And we're hoping that using today's event, we will be able to have a conversation and dialogue within our community and to start looking at how we can work together to anti-racism. So I would like to just give people a brief description of Asian Women for Health. We are a peer-led, community-based, nonprofit organization based in Massachusetts. We're dedicated to advancing Asian women's health and well-being through education, advocacy, and support. And I wanted to thank our funders, Boston Foundations, Lennon Victim Fund, Harvard Pilgrim, and Tufts University for providing support for us so we can continue with our weekly virtual webinars and our weekly group to support Asian women. So I would like to now introduce our moderator for today. So Dr. Suyemoto is a longtime volunteer for Asian Women for Health. She is a feminist, scholar, writer, educator, diversity trainer, mental health advocate, jewelry designer, and avid bicyclist. She also did her research on anti-racist education and issue of race and racism. She is the co-chair for the Greater Boston Regional Suicide Prevention Coalition and the chair of the Massachusetts Coalition for Suicide Prevention Alliance for People of Color Caucus. She is one of the authors of Widening the Lens, exploring the roles of social justice and suicide prevention, a racial equity toolkit. She has spoken and written about her struggle with depression and is a co-founder of the Breaking Silence Project. So without further ado, Peta.
Thank you, Jinji. So welcome, everybody. I'm very glad to be here. I want to get started with our panelists because we have a full agenda. So we're gonna go through and they're gonna introduce themselves and their organization, and the slide will be up so you can read more about them. So first, let's start with Trish. So change the slide. Oh, great.
Hi, everybody. My name is Trish Fontanilla. I am a community and customer experience consultant primarily in the tech universe, but I also run a community group called Boss Filipinos, where I go by CEO, Chief Energy Officer. So I kind of run a lot of the things at the organization. But we bring the Filipino community to the greater Boston area through content and events. So pre-COVID, we were doing Filipino food pop-ups because there's no Filipino restaurants in Boston. There's one in Somerville. And we were also doing meetups and events for people to just get to know the Filipino community, also friends, partners, et cetera, to come. We have a video series, a podcast, and we regularly profile Filipinos in Boston.
Thank you. Jewel? Here we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jewel Pereyra. I'm currently in San Diego, but I live in Somerville, Massachusetts. I am a PhD candidate in American Studies at Harvard, and my research interests are mostly literature and cultural history with an emphasis in performance and theater, particularly in Filipino and African-American, like cross-racial performances and intimacies since 1898, the Philippine-American War, to the present. I'm also one of the co-directors of the Youth Leadership Program for Aspire. Aspire stands for Asian Sisters Participating in Reaching Excellence. And it's a program that started in 2001. And we work with high school Asian American women identifying youth and put together bi-monthly workshops ranging from identity, mental health, education, leadership, and activism.
Thank you. Hinako? Oops, unmute.
Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Chanti, for inviting me to this panel. It's an honor. And so I'm a musician and educator, and today I'm representing BLEAP, which is a Boston-based organization that brings Japanese-speaking female working professionals together. And we host educational seminars that will help to serve them, their needs, such as overcoming language and cultural barriers and things like that. And also providing necessary tools and mindsets that will optimize their potential just to help them in their career path and other life needs. And then I also lead the Japan chapter of Women in Music, which is a nonprofit that works to advance the women's place in the music industry. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Rita?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Saturday afternoon. My name is Rita Shah. I'm part of the Saheli Boston. Saheli has been around for 24 years, helping South Asian women survivors, domestic violence. So it is a great organization. because of the language and cultural capacity, we are able to help survivors from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Maldives Islands. And one of the need we found out last year that Middle Eastern survivors don't have any organizations. So we are helping with the Arabic domestic violence survivors. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I do family counseling, couples counseling, individual counseling. And as you can see, I'm a past president of India Association of Greater Boston and Indian American Forum for Political Education. And I founded a nonprofit for Indian senior citizen organization that has about 400 members. So anybody who needs services, please have them reach out to us. It's 100% free and confidential services. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. And Elizabeth?
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Yang, and I am a business and high performance coach and leadership trainer. Today, I am wearing the hat of founder of Hmong Women Take on the World. It is a global online summit that we launch once every so often, every few years. I am just very passionate about helping female founders pursue influence and affluence and really overcoming technology and social media so that female founders can get their message out into the world. I think oftentimes we let tools and technology and social media hinder that, and it's so important that if we're really passionate about driving change, whether social change, community change, or just getting our voices out into the world for representation, that we challenge ourselves to really rise to the next level. So thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you very much, all of you. This is a great panel. Chin-Chi, would you like to introduce the PSA?
Sure. As I just mentioned that since COVID-19 started, we have experienced many anti-Asian incidents. And we realized that Asian women particularly are 3 times more likely to be attacked physically and verbally. And I personally actually have experienced one in mid-February. Someone called me Wuhan on the subway. So we got this idea to wanted to create a public service announcement as a way to generate awareness and also to help people to think about the analogy between the virus and racism. So we have uploaded, we were lucky enough to secure the in-kind support from Open Pixel Studio, and they produced this 60-second animation. And we have uploaded on our YouTube channel. So I would like to show this PSA to you now.
Racism is a virus. Be safe and stop the spread.
Thank you. So I would like to invite participants in the room to share 1 or 2 words in response to the PSA. But just like to get a quick response from our panelists. Does anyone want to start us off, or shall I call on someone? Jewel, you're first on my screen. Do you mind?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. As someone who examines like performance, and what I mean by that is like everyday actions and how social meaning is created in everyday life. This PSA is a primary example of how the racism and the relationship between racism and public health is happening in our everyday lives. It's impacting us in ways that even people I know, they don't even want to leave their houses or feel very, very scared for their lives. And I know even people like, I have a friend that was on Harvard's campus. She's a student, and she was, someone said a racial slur to her as well. It's what's happening in everyday life and everyday spaces. So that's like my primary reaction as I watch this video and see like children playing in the park and people just walking about.
Thank you. Trish?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that struck me even the second time watching it is the allyship that you see within the video. I think for me, I've been in a lot of experiences where something feels racially charged, but they don't necessarily say slur and no one steps in. So then I kind of get into my head about whether or not something was even happening. So the act of allyship is like one validation, but also being helpful, because there have been moments where, you know, people are like, you should have said something. I'm like, but I was so struck and taken aback that I didn't know what to say. So that part of it, the whole PSA is so short and amazing, but that part of it is something that really struck me for sure.
Thank you. Hinako?
Yeah, I was just gonna pretty much echo what Trish said about the allyship as well. The exact same thing really happened to me too, you know. I think so many of us really have that moment where similar things happen. And so I think that's, you know, as each of us in representing certain organization, we're trying to do to work together, you know, to tackle this issue. So yeah, that was just kind of my response. Yeah.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yeah, this was a very interesting PSA. I think for me, what came up is really the conversation about what is racism versus ignorance, and whose job it is to educate, right? And since I saw the PSA, for me, I love the message and how, you know, I think to Trish's point, whether it's a look, someone's looking at you a certain way and you're wondering if they're just racist or if there's something else that's happening there, like how do you respond to that? I think is a very personal and individual decision. But I think what I love about the PSA is that racism is like a virus, and that it is up to each of us whether or not we interpret it as ignorance or just straight up racism. I think there's a responsibility for each of us to lead as a role model to say, how will I address that? For me personally, I always assume positive intent, and I always assume that ignorance does not automatically mean racism. So let me use this opportunity to serve as a teachable moment. And after that, then I can jump to a conclusion and use my instincts and decisions and guts to say whether or not that was racist or whether or not that was just genuine ignorance. But I think the key here is to recognize that sometimes ignorance isn't always racism. And so how do, you know, we each come to that place with compassion and assume positive intent until the other person has proven themselves that it is racist and it is racism. And then that's a totally different conversation.
Rita?
So I do echo the same thing Elizabeth said. I think many times people are ignorant when we do communicate with them. They are able to understand and really where they were coming from, or they didn't know better. So I think if we can just educate them, I think that is our job as a human being, be there for each other. And unless they are really racist, and then we do need to do whatever. But I think many times it's ignorance that is playing role.
Thank you. So, so we're interested in your experience. We got a little bit of people have experienced racism during COVID, and but I'd like to know, you know, how COVID has affected you, either with the racism or otherwise, and your communities in relation, you know, to you know, the community work you do, and how this has gotten played out, what you've heard, those kinds of things. So Does anyone want to jump in?
I'll start. So my name is Rita Shah. So the COVID has really affected many of our domestic violence survivors with the basic need of food and shelter. So many of the survivors are coming to us and saying, I am not able to pay my rent, or I can't even put a food on table for me and my children. So Saheli has been upfront and helping many of our survivors with the basic need. So that is something I think very important work that Saheli has been doing in the community. And as well as about this racism, we were protesting in Burlington. That's where our office is. We had about 700 people, and we were able to gather and protest against the racism. It was a quiet, peaceful protest, and it was wonderful turnout. We were able to put it on the Facebook, and it was very nice. And then last week we had a community connect. We have like an online community connect where we have a Zoom call out in the community and talk about racism and how it has affected our community, South Asian community. And we had about 30 people who joined, and it was amazing, all the conversation. We heard from a lot of young people who were born and raised here and their thoughts about racism and where they were dark skinned and how it was affecting in their community and all that. So I think a lot of young people are taking lead in this, and it's really great to see their thoughts and how many of us can learn from it, because we all come back with our own baggages from our community with the racism. Even in India, we have a North Indian, they are light skin, and South Indian who are dark skin, and how it affects within the community. So we talked about that. We are hoping to do more of those conversations, because I think it is very important conversation. We do need to take care of this racism within our community before we can go out and help other people. But we do stay strongly with our African American partners, brothers and sisters, and we are shoulder to shoulder with them. And any way we can break the racism in our country, USA, we are here and we would like to work together.
Thank you. Someone else jump in? Trish? Was it someone?
I can say something. So
Okay.
at Asian Women for Health, can you hear me?
Yes, a little.
Okay. So at Asian Women for Health, we have curated COVID specific resources on our website. We also have a section on resources for anti-racism. And we, for the COVID resources, we have it in different Asian languages. And we also know that at this time, many of our members are, stress level is up. And so we offer weekly check-in groups. We have a group for moms, a group for LGBTQ+, a group for adult women, a group for singles, and a group for cancer survivors and patients. And in addition, we have done a webinar on how to be allies, and you can find this information on the presentation on our website. And we also realized that a lot of us, wanted to intervene, but we don't really know what to say, or were struck or taken aback, like panelists just mentioned. So there's actually a resource called Hollaback in the chat box for you. You can learn the tactics, how to intervene safely without putting yourself at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. One of our other panelists?
Yeah, I can
Great.
talk about the initiatives that BLEAP has been taken. So since COVID, we first of all wanted to think about that question, has any of our community members affected directly, because of racism that is tied to COVID, and we wanted to kind of separate that from overall general racism that is also apparent. And so we just did like a survey to ask certain questions like, so do you think you were subjected to some sort of racial slurs or any sort of racist comments recently, or you think some of it was triggered by COVID and things like that. And the response was sort of half and half. Half of the responders, they said they didn't experience anything, but some of them definitely did. One person was yelled at, similar comments like Tianji was saying, and others, sometimes they were subjected to tests before entering premises just because they look certain ways, or so definitely we've gotten realistic comments from the Japanese community here in the Boston areas, but we couldn't say if it was specifically because of COVID. I think some of it is really just been there. It's more of like this overall racism that's there anyway, regardless of this pandemic that's taking place. Maybe it's more apparent now, but yeah, just based on the responses that we've gotten, that's the overall takeaway. And at this moment, regardless, going forward, we're thinking of hosting more educational seminars and film nights for Japanese community to further educate about, first of all, what BLM is, right now, especially I think Japanese people sometimes, or the community, they think that it doesn't really affect them, or, it's like somebody else's problem. And so we don't really agree with that. And I think even within the Japanese community, there's different forms of racism, but people just don't want to talk about them or acknowledge them. And sometimes they think that they don't have that bias, But so I think it's important for us to educate them, like Rita was saying, in different ways. And one of them that we came up with was maybe they can take like a bias acknowledgement test that is available online. That's a really good way to objectively assess, like, okay, do I have that too, or is it just so that's one way. And we are thinking of hosting, like, again, film nights to maybe feature certain there are a lot of like films and novels that are available nowadays to further educate about this topic, not just about BLM, but just in general about racism. So we're planning to do that. And then also for Women in Music Japan as well, just to give you an update, the coronavirus has affected the music industry very severely. And so in order to tackle that, we've been hosting a lot of interview series and asking female musicians, how have they been tackling the situation? How can we come together and, overcome this? So it's going outside of racism spectrum, but just, we've compiled list of resources that are helpful in terms of gathering financial assistance and grants, funds, things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's also very important for us as Asian Americans to look at the racism we have within the community and against other groups, and be able to talk about that within our community too. But someone else who would like to share something about the impact of the COVID racism?
I would like to share something as well too, Pat. Elizabeth here. So, Hmong Women Take on the World, our summit only happens once a year. And that's not to take away from all the other amazing Hmong women groups out there. But for my organization, pre-COVID, our theme this year was to rise beyond borders. How can we help more Hmong women to better collaborate? Because that's what I constantly hear a lot about with AAPI women is how do we collaborate and how come we don't collaborate? Well, with the Hmong women community, that's also a very deep theme as well too. And, as the founder, listening to the conversations and stories post-COVID now or during COVID, I've had to look at the format a little bit differently. I think on two levels. The first one is really our voices around courage courage to speak up, courage to really take a stand now on what our values are, especially among what's happening right now with Black Lives Matter, and really taking a stand on having courage. And then the second piece is really this idea that somehow we just cannot coexist, that it's either or, either you support, this or you don't. And I think there's more than enough abundance. And so the second theme with COVID has really been, for me, with the summit, has really been, how can I take a deeper look at courage among women? And two, this idea that we can coexist. It's not an either or. It's a fallacy that many others have pushed upon us, and we can coexist and we can rise bigger and better together. That there's enough space for those different conversations, but you just have to have the courage to take a side. And I think that has probably been the biggest dialogue, is that people now have to. Before COVID, I think you can kind of get away with just being politically correct. I think now you can't. You just can't. You have to take a stand. And so for me, I think that's one of the upsides of what COVID is making very apparent, is that you have to pick a side.
Thank you. Jewel or Trish, like to join in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I would love to say that I've been composed and well during the coronavirus, but we were talking about this in the prep call. I live by myself. I haven't seen any of my family since Christmas. Being in the Filipino community, not pretty much, a lot of the people I know are caregivers and work in the healthcare system. And so when I get a call from my mom, it is because someone is sick or passed. And so we didn't make a general announcement about racism or COVID early on in February, I think, along with the Boston Asian American Film Festival. We were making sure that people were continuing to support Chinatown. We try to post as much about Asian events as much as possible, and that was really important to us. And then I had put something out in March about making sure people took care of themselves, because a lot of people in our community, especially in Boston, live in multi-generational households. And so trying to make sure they have the resources they can, because they are living with elders. So it's like, there are people within that this impacts the most, that you can't go and hang with your friends and go out as much. So we were kind of focusing on the caregiving side and checking in with folks around that. But the Filipino community, in addition, like the racism, I think was secondary, but the let's check in on how the mental health of caregivers and the folks in the medical community, and then seeing the racism that some of them are facing. I haven't heard of a lot of incidents in Boston, but just seeing the coverage, seeing any Asian that's been impacted, but then when someone's identified as Filipino, that comes up a little bit more. So that has been interesting. And then also what Elizabeth said is, just because you're a person of color doesn't mean you can sit back. Like the anti-racism part, I think, is something that has been a huge conversation. Things that's, people that you're like, that person's really great deep down, they're a really, really nice person. It's like, but they're saying certain things and they're making spaces uncomfortable for other people. And so they may mean well, but it's taking time to talk to them, especially within, there's sources that you can share, but the people that know that you care about them. And it's important for us to have these conversations with our friends, with our families, people that we trust and they trust us, to help them through this, because it is this, I talk about this in tech. Like when I started Boss Filipinos, you were like, I didn't realize you were Filipino. And I'm like, because in tech, I'm usually wearing the woman hat and pushing and getting mentorship for women and making sure women are in the room. And sometimes there's men of color in there. So I'm not necessarily thinking about that, but it's that. So figuring out, when you're wearing these different hats and the different communities that you represent, making sure yes, there are things that happen to us and there's trauma that's happened to us as well, but there's conversations and things that are happening that we should be able to empathize with and it's not about us right now. You know, there's certain things that, certain conversations that we're in that are not about us. And how can we offer our help, our solidarity, our allyship, coming from places that we come from, and knowing what we know. And so that is, and admitting that we need to learn. I think that's the other thing too, especially for adults, especially for older folks, like there's still things I'm learning, you know, and admitting that, especially as leaders. I posted something about Juneteenth yesterday and said, I didn't learn about this until maybe 7 years ago, like really learn about Juneteenth. And me saying that, people have messaged me and said like, I didn't really learn about it until like this year or a couple of years ago. So I think as leaders too, and the importance of us being a little bit more vulnerable so our communities feel open to ask questions.
Thank you. Joel?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Trish, for that. So I mostly work with youth, at least with my program. So a lot of the conversations I was having with high schoolers, for them, like, of course, like they are thinking about their social networks in the class, in the school space. They're thinking about tests, they're thinking about their futures. So a way for us to sort of pay attention and respond to their needs was to bring in mental health professionals, especially those that specialize in mental health in Asian American communities. And for them to sort of gain tools, because some of them might come from households that mental health is not talked about. So sort of pointing them to professionals and resources was the main intervention that we were talking about, because this was pre the killing of George Floyd. So yeah, we were mostly focusing on like Asian racism and yeah, with COVID.
Thank you. Yeah, I get, a lot of you touched on this, but I think one of the questions that I have is, you know, what can we do as Asian Americans to take action and strengthen our allyship and solidarity with Black Lives Matter and the Black community? And how can we have these really hard conversations with, you know, with people in our communities, you know, people who are maybe a different generation or have a different political view. So I'm really interested in, you know, how to do this, because I think a lot of people are feeling a little helpless right now.
I would love to answer this one. I'm so
go for it.
So 2 things. I think the first thing is, as AAPI women, we have to humbly be visible. We have to work through whatever internal blocks we have. We have to be seen. We have to be willing to be visible and put ourselves out there. I think that's really the first step. We know that representation matters, but the more that the AAPI community, the more that AAPI women and sisters are willing to put themselves out there to be seen, I think the more that we can start to really see that AAPI women are more than just 2-dimensional, that there are many flavors of us. We are very much 3-dimensional. And I've done a lot of work with just women, but something within our AAPI culture, I think especially with Asian women, seems to kind of keep us hidden. And I think in the world that we live today, we have to be seen. I think the second thing, in terms of, you know, what can we do to stand or become better allies? I had a Black female entrepreneur ask me this, and I think this is really important for this conversation, was she asked me, Elizabeth, do you think that white women would buy from me? You know? And when I was thinking about how to answer that question, I realized that her question wasn't just whether or not white women would buy from her because she's Black, but it was because it was really around one's own self-worth. Am I valuable enough, and do I see myself in a way that other white women would be willing to admire me and follow me and buy from me? And it made me realize that if you had asked me before COVID, before Black Lives Matter, before this year, if I would have ever imagined a Black woman coming to me for advice, I would have told you no, because there are plenty of amazing Black women that they could seek advice from. But it made me realize that the common denominator across what, you know, this Black female entrepreneur is facing and what I was facing as an Asian Hmong women entrepreneur myself is that we are the person of other. I know what it's like when you're the other person, when you're the outlier, you're not the norm. And you know, for me, as I shared that with her, I said, I would be lying if I told you it was easy being a woman of color, but it's so worth it. And I don't want to be seen sometimes, but I have to. But I think it really starts with what I said to her was, here's my 2 cents, but how can I support you? And I think that's the most important question, is that as an ally, we don't assume we know better, or that we know that me being among women, that racism feels like this. So therefore, you know, racism for a Black person feels like that. I can have compassion and empathy and sympathy, but it's not up to me to tell them and share my experience. If they're talking to me, it's my job to listen and ask them, how can I show up to support you? I think that's what matters most. And so be visible, be seen, work through that. And the second thing is to really listen and really be open to the fact that it's not just because you're a person of color, woman of color, but that we are all united because we have been the person that was the other person. And that to me is much more powerful than this conversation of just race alone. And then if we can tap into that from a compassionate perspective that allows us to show up in a way that says, how can I support you? It makes us a much stronger ally than assuming that we know what racism is like because we've been discriminated and has experienced racism ourselves.
Thank you. Would someone like to add to that from our panel?
I'd like to add something. So first off, speaking of Black female entrepreneurs, I'm currently wearing a As Strong as the Woman Next to Me t-shirt from Mess in a Bottle, which is run by a Black woman entrepreneur. So if you want to buy from her, you know, we're only as strong as people that are next to us. But I think something in the Filipino community that I've been having discussions with is people trying to understand, you know, trying to get over the trauma of any things that they've experienced. And then also understanding just our community ourselves. I think that's like, I shared this the other day. I think the hardest thing about love your neighbor as yourself is a lot of people aren't sure how to love themselves yet. And so when they see other things in other folks, there's things that they feel like they hate. There's something, you know, when someone's proud of who they are, they're just like this, like, oh, why do they get to do that? It's like, you get to be proud of yourself too. And so having conversations in the Filipino community, even I had two co-founders who are not as active anymore. Both of them grew up in the Philippines. And I remember early on having a conversation with them about racism, and they just like didn't really understand it. Like I was 5 years old the first time someone told me to go back to where I came from, and I was born here in the US, and my parents just didn't talk about it. They just like took me out of the situation and like didn't talk about it. And they grew up in spaces and places where the majority was Filipino. They saw Filipinos on television. They just didn't understand how excited I would get when like I'd see an Asian person on American television. So even just like understanding your own dynamics of your community and where people are coming from, I get, as a Filipino American, I get like so jazzed about it. And I've gotten mad at people, but they're like, you have to tell your stories, because otherwise there's again, not necessarily it's ignorance, but also just like, we didn't have that experience. And so in some of the conversations we've had, there was just folks that like, I don't understand what's wrong, because they just like aren't, the proximities part, they're like not in communities that are diverse, or they're like, no one's ever told me this. So making sure that those stories are heard are really important. And then another thing I've seen, and this is with Boss Filipinos, but also professionally, I have a lot of folks tell me like, I don't know what to say. And it's okay if you don't know what to say, but if you are a leader, or you have a platform, there are so many other people that are saying really amazing things through posts, through tweets, through videos. So like I say like the least you can do is read a book, watch a video, uplift a Black voice, and say why it's important to you. Because you know, it's really great to just hit the retweet button, hit the share button. But I think as leaders, that people listen to what we say and read what we put out there, it's important to advocate for people and say why we believe things are important, because we have that. You know, we talked a little bit about everyone's doing what they can. I don't, despite running things, I don't actually like to be at the center of stuff, but I know that, you know, when I share something yesterday, for Juneteenth, there was My Black Receipt, and people were posting receipts of organizations they were supporting and buying from. I bought from Urban Grape, which is a Black-owned wine and spirit store in Boston. And I had 2 people message me and say, I didn't realize it was Black-owned. I didn't realize they had they have like actually like producers of color labels on their wine bottles and their spirits. And they're like, and they were non-POC folks. And they're like, oh, now I know. And I can go buy from them, because they're just, for a lot of folks, I'm like their one, you know, friends that is speaking up about this. So even things like that I posted on, I just posted on Instagram stories at first, and then got a couple responses, and I was like, I guess I should post this on Twitter and Facebook too, and see what happens, and have people become aware of this, because there is so much information, but people trust me when I share things. So using my platform, it's important for me to, you know, advocate and to say why things are important.
Thank you. It's really important to think about how we advocate, and not only, I think your point about sharing our stories and knowing ourselves, and then also being able to uplift voices of the Black community and other communities. Does someone else want to share?
Yeah. So yeah, both, I mean, everyone's comments are incredible, and I do agree when it comes to supporting, you know, BLM and that movement. I mean, first of all, I mean, I also personally need to learn more about that, but, you know, I guess, just admitting that, like, we need to learn, and also just, like, you know, advocating for whoever that's around, like, who's doing amazing stuff, like local businesses and, you know, people that, you know, there are just different ways to support. But when it comes to our own community, the Japanese community, especially because of the way that people are educated in Asia, maybe other countries are similar too, but like they're not used to being assertive, you know, and especially like if they're females, we're taught in different ways to just kind of keep quiet, just like, you know, keep peace within the community rather than disturbing it. And so, like, you know, I think we have a lot to do there. First of all, just being able to be the first ones to say, no, actually, this is not okay. And, you know, I think maybe Trish or someone touched upon this earlier, but, you know, to be that first voice, I think BLEAP can definitely be that voice. And so, you know, having more access to role models like that, or just be visible, right? Like Elizabeth was saying, be seen, be visible, just, you know, put our voices out there, because it also matters. And in doing so, we hope to just as well, like, provide necessary tools, educational seminars, because sometimes people, Japanese women especially, if they're from there, are sometimes dealing with insecurities that come with language barriers. You know, am I saying things correctly? Am I pronouncing things correctly? And on top of that, am I understanding this culture correctly? Or, you know, like all these barriers that hinders them from saying what it is that is going on. So we provide different events, in-person showcases and seminars. I think also coming up like this together with other Asian women's community is incredible. I think this is like giving access to our community a new understanding and awareness of like what is going on with other Asian women's communities. And like, I hope to do more of this, you know, this is really fun. And yeah, not just like serious conversations, but I hope to just meet and collaborate and just like work together more. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to share one resource. I actually work for as Chenchi said, the Mass Coalition for Suicide Prevention. And we put out a toolkit called Widening the Lens, which is about suicide prevention and racial equity. Now, suicide prevention is primarily a white field. So it was sort of pitched more to our white colleagues, but it also might be helpful for people to look at. We're doing a webinar, I'll put the webinar in the chat, about this, about introducing the toolkit, and the toolkit is on the website if people want to look at it. It has a lot about foundational knowledge, like, you know, what is white privilege, you know, about a thing about allyship, those kinds of things. And I think it's really important for us to think about how to be allies as Asian people, and, you know, and have these conversations. Does anyone else have a comment? I think we have time. Jewel, you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I really want to stress the point of humility, and even having a very like a radical humility when talking about Black Lives Matter, and talking about the demands of the protesters and the activists, and really listening to what they want, what their demands are, I think is a huge issue in this movement right now. And even thinking about the ways that even you know, social media is a place where a lot of trending happens, and making sure that the work that we're doing is not just to trend, to show, to perform these sort of allyship, but to do it in our everyday lives, and to do it when it's not sexy, when it's not for profit, right? I think that the work that we need to do now has to be deeply, deeply rooted in what we do and what we say, how we hire people, how we talk about health, how we talk about education, all across the board. So I think that's really important, at least hearing the demands from protesters and the organizers, since it's been, you know, 5 years since the first Black Lives Matter protest, you know, so.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Rita, do you want to share anything? Any thoughts? You good?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I think I agree with all of you. I think there's so much work needs to be done in our community, and we all need to work together. And I think the culture we are coming from, where we have been trained not to speak in front of the power, elders and all that, and we need to come out of those comfort zone and see how we can fight the racism. Very, very important issue in our community.
Let's see. We have a question from the audience, and I'm going to ask it and ask people to be quick because we're running out of time. The question is, do Asian women leaders find themselves as safe sounding boards for both Black colleagues and white allies during times like this? Where do we fit in this conversation amongst, in relation to other groups? Anyone want to give it a shot? And then we'll close this wonderful conversation. Anyone? All right, I'll answer it. If no one else. I think that it depends on the relationship that people have with their Black and white colleagues. And it depends on whether that person is seen as an ally to their Black colleagues already, and whether they can be a bridge for white colleagues to understand racism. But so it really has to do with each of us as individuals, what our relationships are and what our knowledge is of anti-racist work. And, if we can be that, and I'm an educator, so I feel like that's my role in the world, is to be that bridge as much as I can. But, I think that we all have to do our work along the sides of everybody else to be able to get to the point where we can talk to everyone, including, people in our own community as well as people outside of our community. So we're at the end of our time. Chinchi, do you want to share ways that people can promote the PSA and opportunities for Asian Women for Health?
So we have the PSA on our YouTube channel, and we will follow up with a recording of this event to whoever registered for this event. And I also wanted to let people know our upcoming events. Ashley, can you pull up the slide? So, like I said, we have a weekly webinar, and so for next Saturday, we will have a workshop on reclaiming your narrative by Ali Nguyen, who is a former Asian Women for Health program staff. And on August 15, we're going to have our annual Asian American Mental Health Forum. And this event has always been free and open to all. And what's unique about this event is that we always have peers who have lived experience, who will share their perspective. And we will have some COVID related workshop and panel discussion at the event. And also, two of our key events for Asian Women for Health. One is the Celebration Benefit Fashion Show, and the other one is our annual conference. And this year, we're going to make it virtual because many of our members and guests have underlying health condition. But we hope that you will put these dates on your calendar and to make sure that you register and join us and support us.
Thank you, Chin-Chi. I just want to be, the Celebrations Fashion Show is a very unique event. It's all community models, myself included. I've never thought of myself as a model. But anyway, and it's a really great event because all of the stories and the narratives are part of the event. So I really, for all of the events, they're really great. And I would encourage people to come out. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, panelists. Really wonderful conversation. I'm sorry it's so short, but I do hope we can continue these conversations in our communities as well as among ourselves and outside of our communities as well. So take care, everybody, and thank you for joining.
Thank you.